Hey, listen, and welcome to A Link to the Filmcast. I'm your host, David Reese, in the show where we adventure across the realms of Hyrule and the silver screen. And today we're going to be looking at the movie Dungeons and Dragons on Honor Among Thieves. But before we jump into our main story today, let's look at a random Zelda page. Today's page is The Great Ingo. Was that his name? Ocarina of Time. He referred to himself as like the Great Ingo. That's the one. If you remember Ocarina of Time, he's at Lon Lon Ranch. He's the farmhand helping out. And he's the one jealous of Milan, the main dude. And then in the future, he had taken over, and you have to race him to get Epona. So they kind of paint him as a bad guy. His character model is reused in Majora's Mask, but he's a different character. He's a different type of brother. The Gorman brothers is what they're known as in Majora's Mask. I never played Oracle of Seasons. That should be on my to-do list for this next year. I had never played the Oracle games. Oracle of Seasons, Oracle of Ages. Apparently, Ingo makes an appearance in that. He has a vase collection, and it's part of a trade quest, according to the Zelda wiki, so that would be interesting to check out. So he's had several kind of appearances or uses, whether he's the number 2 farmhand in Ocarina, a vase collector, or the owner of the milk bar in Majora's Mask. Also looks like he had a spin-off appearance in the Tingle's Rosy Rupee Land, which Tingle's not as popular here in the States. I wonder if he's popular any other places in the world, because I don't think we got any of the Tingle games here. I don't think they even make him anymore. Like, they didn't even put him in Skyward Sword. He hasn't been in a game in a while. He hasn't been in Skyward Sword, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom. Tingle's an interesting character. I think the last time we saw him was Wind Waker, and he actually had something to do with the plot there, so it wasn't just a character. You had to encounter him for the plot in Wind Waker. So that's interesting. News since the last episode. We got an official timeline placement for Echoes of Wisdom. All the YouTubers have tried to spit their take and see what parts of the timeline placement they agree with versus what placement they don't agree with. According to the Zelda website, we are in the Downfall timeline. That's the timeline where Link loses an Ocarina of Time in the fight against Ganon, and this takes place after the events of A Link Between Worlds, Triforce Heroes, and then this is before the events of The Legend of Zelda and Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. Echoes of Wisdom, I hope people are still playing through that, taking their time. I'm working through it, trying not to rush through it. Also staying busy with work and other personal matters, so I'm trying to get through, trying to play it when I can. But I'm enjoying it so far. Especially like those first 5 hours. I don't know, there was something about the way they onboarded you into the game that really made it special. And then after you do the first 3 dungeons and you kind of get a main game event, that was really cool. If you haven't been playing it, kind of recommend it, especially if you liked the Link to the Past, Link Between Worlds. And it kind of hybrids with Tears of the Kingdom, like world building, in the same way that, we got the Gerudo and Gorons in this one. And it pays homage to the old Zelda. We got the Deku Scrubs in this one. So check it out if you haven't had the chance yet. Also in Japan, it looks like they have little what do they call them? The dispensers for the Zonai devices. It's like a gumball machine where you can actually go out and get a little toy Zonai device in Japan, which is pretty cool. On the list of plastic junk I don't need, it would be kind of cool to have, one of each type just around, or not even each type, like maybe just the glider and a fan and a steering stick. Or there's the Akita bike or the Akira cycle where you just have the two fans and the steering column and you can use that to fly around. I'd like to make that in real life. Just get the three components and like hot glue them together. I think that'd be pretty cool. Have that on my desk at work. And in the world of movies, I've been seeing a lot of movies in theaters this last month, and I have movies I'm looking forward to. Quick rundowns. Saw Wicked. Not one for musicals, but it's an epic story, which is not quite an adventure. I mean, I guess going through it's an adventure story, and it's interesting, worth a watch. Moana 2 is an adventure, but it falls into the same trap that a lot of Disney sequels do, where they just try to capture the magic of the first movie, but can't do so well. And then I saw the original Nosferatu movie from 1922 in anticipation of this holiday's release of Nosferatu. I've read the book Dracula. Nosferatu is just a knockoff of Dracula. And very rarely do we have movies that are over 100 years old. It was interesting to watch that part of like film history unfold. It was a silent film, so there was word cards in between different scenes or in between dialogue whenever characters spoke. It was almost the same plot as Dracula. They changed the character names and the place names, but a lot of the main story elements were the same. The ending was different. It was still a pretty good watch for someone that likes film. Let's jump into the main movie for the episode. We're looking at Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves. Or if you like abbreviating, it would be D&D HAT. D&D HAT. HAT. I'm assuming the subtitle is so they don't just call it the D&D movie. They just want it to be like a chronicle or a story within the D&D world or mechanics, which I think is pretty smart. So if they wanted to do a sequel, they don't pigeonhole themselves into having to reuse the same characters and plots, all that, trying to make a big cinematic universe. It's kind of its own one-off thing, and I really like how they did that. If they make another movie, if they make a sequel, they can just have a blank canvas and just the rules of D&D to go by and start with a new story. They don't have to be constrained with what they established in the first movie. Even though if they stayed true to the game mechanics, it should hold its time. But it's kind of funny, as I was watching this and putting stuff together, I realized that this is already the second Hasbro movie we've looked at for this podcast, because we did look at Transformers just a few episodes ago, but way different direction, tone, settings. The movies are 14 years apart. It's not Michael Bay, not a bunch of explosions. It's fun to do another Hasbro movie since they own Dungeons and Dragons as part of their like game umbrella. I never had a history with D&D before seeing this movie. I saw this movie with my brother-in-law and some friends, and I kind of just went in blind, not knowing anything. I knew Chris Pine. I knew the actors and actresses involved in the movie, but I didn't know anything about like D&D mechanics. And then since I saw it in theaters, which was a year and a half ago, I joined a D&D campaign, started my own character, and just joined an existing campaign. I've been playing it, and now I'm watching this movie with some of the background of D&D. I kind of understand some of the jokes or little inside Easter eggs that they placed inside the movie, which I think is really cool. So as someone that likes the role playing, watching a D&D movie is actually pretty amusing. And even just alone as a movie alone, this was a great heist film. This was a great little adventure with humor and different elements that it was a good watch even if you're not into the Dungeons and Dragons. You wouldn't know unless you were told. If this movie didn't have the name Dungeons and Dragons with it and just Honor Among Thieves, a fantasy story or something, it would still hold its ground pretty well, I believe. There's some elements that are a little weird and out there, but that could just be established as the movie's specific tone that it's trying to establish. I remember Zelda used to be described, we took the numbers out of D&D or like tabletop games. Zelda famously, you don't really have to deal with numbers. It's an action game and you just do strikes and you don't even have like health points in Zelda. You do, but they're in the form of the hearts and just the hearts get depleted. Not really, you don't really see numbers until Breath of the Wild, where weapons, shields, armor have different ratings, but you're not doing calculations. You're not even seeing calculations done in real time. You just know that higher the number is better. So I guess that's kind of a Zelda connection to D&D. Zelda is great in the sense that it doesn't use the numbers. It's less complex than that. It's something that a child can pick up and play with and go with the flow. It does take away some of the randomness of like the dice rolls. Zelda has very rigid rules and guidance on what the story structure is, how events play out. Where in D&D, everyone knows there's the 20 sided die that you roll, and depending on the roll, you either do something successfully, okay, or you fail miserably. So I really like that randomization element in D&D, and I understand that putting it into a game and trying to make all the different branching paths, success, fail, chances could create, depends on how you write it out, could really balloon up into a super long, especially if you're trying to convey a certain story. You can't really do that with the randomness. I know there's Baldur's Gate 3 that got Game of the Year was it last year? We got Game of the Year and we got the Game Awards coming up. I think that's this week. So we shall see. I'd be interested to play Baldur's Gate. Maybe I'll try to get into that this next year. I got a short list of games I want to play and get through. Some of the talent in Honor Among Thieves. Chris Pine, know him from like Star Trek movies, and he's the guy in Wonder Woman. I like him as an actor. Another Chris to like. There's Chris Hemsworth, Chris Pratt, Chris Evans. If your name's Chris, are you destined for a role in Hollywood? No, but there's a lot of Chris's in Hollywood. And they're like, these Chris's are big names too. They're not just side characters. I like his character, Edgin, in this movie. I'll kind of just refer to him as Ed in shorthand. We're introduced to him right away at the beginning of the movie. We're introduced that he's a main character, and he's also not super serious. We kind of, early on in the movie, he establishes that he's knitting in a prison cell, and he's talking to, they get the new cellmate, and he's like, oh, don't bother Holga while she's eating her potato. And that ends up becoming a gag throughout the rest of the film. And then when the new prisoner doesn't really respect that, and she kicks his butt at the beginning, and she kicks his butt a little at the beginning, it really helps establish the tone for the movie. You're like, okay, this movie's not taking itself too seriously, so I shouldn't need to take it seriously. I'll think about it the way I want to think about it. And don't read too much into the fine print, and there's going to be humor. Holga, his sidekick or co-lead, is played by Michelle Rodriguez from the Fast and the Furious franchise. Having her be this stoic, she doesn't talk much, and the fact she's kind of there to keep head in line and help with the story, I think is good. I think she played her role well. The opening Jarnathan bit was fun. Apparently, I was reading they built like a Jarnathan whole suit and mechanism that the actor that played him, I don't have his name written down. He had like a 14-foot wingspan, and they actually had that like as an animatronic suit, so the actor could see out the neck, and the eyes and the beak were all animatronics. Which I don't know if I've talked about it on this show before, but I really like movies utilizing practical effects over the green screen. So when they do stuff like that, they're actually building costumes and doing practical effects like that instead of just CGI and green screening stuff in. It adds to the art form for me. And I really like that. We get the story, we get a prelude, just a kind of a generic, yeah, I used to be good, did some bad, reckoning came, and now I gotta get my vengeance. There was a double cross at the beginning. He doesn't know it's double cross, but we shortly learn once he reaches his friend Forge, he becomes the Lord of Neverwinter, that he kind of turns on him and they have to make an escape. Hugh Grant plays Forge. He becomes the Lord of Neverwinter. I saw him last year in the Wonka movie. He was the Oompa Loompa with Timothée Chalamet. I know he's in a movie right now called Heretic, and he's been in other movies before. And I think he does good in his role, kind of like as the backstabber. If you've ever seen Italian Job, this movie kind of has that same, not almost the same formula. I just thought of like Italian Job, and I think you could make some connections between those two movies. But the whole point of the movie is there's a MacGuffin, a device that our main character wants to get, the tablet of reawakening to bring back his wife who has perished. And how are they going to do it? They got to get a team together. So they get Simon, played by Justice Smith, no relation to Will Smith, according to some searches. He is our bad sorcerer. So we have Doric, the druid. She's a shapeshifter, pretty cool abilities. She's a tiefling, which is a race, I think, unique to Dungeons and Dragons. I'd never heard of it before, but she's got the shape-shifting ability. And then we kind of go through this adventure of the gang learning about each other and their backstories. We go to Holga's home with her ex-husband who had taken a new wife, it looks like. We had this graveyard scene where they're got this device where they can wake up a corpse and then they can ask the corpse 5 questions before it goes back to death, and it has to answer them. So they're trying to get this helmet. I just thought of they got a helmet they have to get in order to get to the tablet of reawakening. They have to get the helm to get back past Sophina's spell in order to get the tablet. So it's kind of like a fetch quest building out. I kind of like the humor. The graveyard, there's a line. Simon's explaining the rules. He's like, when we wake up the dead, we have to ask them 5 questions. And then is it Doric that says, why 5 questions? Seems arbitrary. And then he replies, I don't know. That's just how it works. Which is just following the rules of the game. That's how it works. We get a history dump about the Red Wizards being the bad guys, how they take over other places, kind of like with the Beckoning Death, which is shown like this red cloud. that they summon, and that's how they take over different countries. We meet Yendar, the paladin, who's kind of like the guest character for a campaign. If you have a friend join for a session and you just have him come in, and he's just the cool guy that has all the abilities and stuff and represents righteousness. And he's not just in here for a scene, he's in here in the movie for a good chunk. I think that's pretty good. He has a pretty good sword fight. There's assassins out to get them that know what they're up to. And Yendar kind of protects the main gang via sword fight, which was pretty cool. Gotta give the movie the props for its sword fight. The action sequences in this movie are really good. Well choreographed, and they don't take you out of it. You're not watching them and they're like, no, gross. They feel good to watch. The CGI feels good. It doesn't feel tacky. I'm curious to see how this movie is going to age. If I see this in 10, 20, 30 years. I know movies that utilize this technology don't always age well. Like Lord of the Rings, the stuff that they did practical and spent a lot of production on looks and ages very well. Whereas the CGI and the special effects is starting to show as you rewatch the Lord of the Rings movies now. Conflict point, they get the helmet, doesn't attune. You get the high sun games. They got plans A, B, C, trying to figure out where the stuff is. Double cross, we find out that Forge and the witch, Forge is actually planning to betray the witch, or the noble people. He's not betraying the witch. They just have a secret shady deal. He's taking the treasure for himself while the witch takes over the town and he's escaping. Our gang thwarts that attempt, and as they're with the treasure sailing away and they see the evilness happening at the games, they have a change of heart, which I think this is probably one of the big character developments for our crew. They could just sail off into the sunset with the riches and be good, but they know in their hearts the right thing to do is to go back and save the people. And then at the very end, when Holga passes away and they decide to use the tablet of resurrection on her, I thought that was good character development especially for Ed, because they've already grieved his wife, Kira's mother, and Holga's been by his side the last couple of years, and she's been a part of the family. I really like how they went with that ending. I like the fact Yendar comes across Forge in the forest towards the end, and then Forge is in prison, kind of echoing the way the movie started. I think overall it was a great movie. IMDb had given it a 7.2 out of 10. What did Rotten Tomatoes give it? Rotten Tomatoes gave it a 91%. It has a 93% on the audience score, which has been renamed. What's this all about? It's now called the Popcorn Meter. We're launching an elevated designation for the movies with the highest verified audience scores. Rotten Tomatoes has been around for a long time, more than 25 years now, and core of what we do has always revolved around critics and the reviews they publish. It looks like they're adding a different level of a fan rating for major movies. I don't know if every movie is going to have it, but that's interesting. Now I know something. See how Rotten Tomatoes does their ratings now. Interesting. Other things about the movie, you can tell that the writers took inspirations from a ton of other media. Indiana Jones and Monty Python and the Holy Grail really shines through, especially in the style of humor that's present in the movie. Heist movies, I know it's easy to rip on if there's that Rick and Morty episode where they make fun of the heist movie formula. I think that's interesting, and watching a heist movie since watching that Rick and Morty is kind of funny to see how predictable some elements are, and the fantasy landscape, I think, for this was really good to have that on the backstage of. All the spells in this film are actually Dungeons and Dragons spells. A lot of them aren't named in the movie, but they're all spells used in the game Dungeons and Dragons itself. They didn't make up spells for the movie. They used all existing spells for the movie, which I think is cool. Wizards of the Coast, which is the company that owns Dungeons and Dragons, they made stat blocks, character sheets for all the characters. Michelle Rodriguez gained 15 pounds of muscle. There's a lot of fun facts for this movie. Overall, I'd strongly recommend it. A little predictable. You kind of know what you're going in for. It doesn't take itself too seriously. But it's a fun watch. Get some popcorn. Watch it. Strongly recommend. And that's going to be it for this time. If you have questions, feel free to send me a message at ZeldaFilmcast@gmail.com. Questions can be about Zelda, movies, life, or whatever you want. And that's going to be it for this episode. If you like what you've heard, tell a friend, and leave us a review. If you have any movie suggestions or feedback, I'd love to hear them. Follow me on X at ZeldaFilmcast. Next time, we're just going to be doing holiday movies. We're going to be doing holiday movies next time. May the Triforce be with you.